Are you lost, Grandpa? The air show isn't until next month. The voice was sharp, dripping with the smug confidence that comes from youth, mixed with a touch of authority. It belonged to a young man in a flightline technician's uniform. His name tag reading Kyle, arms crossed and posture impatient. He towered over the elderly man before him. The old man didn't respond. He stood quietly, his eyes fixed not on the rude technician, but on the silent, majestic figure of the F-16 Fighting Falcon, resting on the tarmac. Once a powerful machine, the jet now sat lifeless, its canopy gaping open like a broken jaw, and cables spilling from an open maintenance panel. Signs of a problem no one had managed to fix. His name was Arthur Vance. Age had bent his back and carved. Deep lines across his hands, hands that bore the faint scars of a lifelong lived. Dressed in simple khakis and a worn windbreaker, he looked more like a curious visitor who had wandered too far than someone who belonged there. Another technician, slightly older and streaked with sweat and grease, joined Kyle. "Anything?" he asked. "Just this guy," Kyle muttered, jerking his chin toward Arthur. "Probably thinks it's a museum display." Turning back to the old man, Kyle raised his voice, speaking slowly as if to a child. "Sir, you can't be here. This is a restricted area. You need to head back to the gate." Arthur's pale blue eyes, clouded with age, finally moved. He didn't look at Kyle instead. His gaze traced the sleek body of the fighter jet. Following invisible lines only, he seemed to understand. Slowly, he stepped closer to the aircraft's landing gear. Kyle's frustration, already stretched thin after hours of failed repairs, snapped. "I said step away from the aircraft," he barked, striding forward and gripping Arthur's shoulder. "This is a $16 million jet, not a park bench. What do you think you're doing?" Arthur turned his head at last, meeting Kyle's glare. His expression was calm, unbothered, no fear, no irritation. Just a quiet, unwavering focus, as if Kyle's outbursts were nothing more than background noise. Pressure weighed heavily on the flight line. The grounded F-16, call sign Viper 07, was the lead aircraft for a critical readiness drill, launching in under an hour. Foreign dignitaries were already waiting in the control tower, and the base commander's voice crackled over the radio, clipped, cold and growing sharper by the minute. Kyle's crew had been at it for 3 grueling hours. They'd replaced the avionics control unit, tested power relays, and rerun diagnostics endlessly. Still, the jet sat dead, an expensive paperweight. The appearance of this old man felt like the final insult. "I need to see your ID," Kyle demanded, his tone brittle with forced authority. "Show me your flight line pass now." Arthur didn't reach for a wallet. Instead, he calmly pulled a small, worn leather pouch from his windbreaker pocket, darkened by years of use. Kyle laughed derisively. "What's that, your toolkit? You going to fix a fly-by-wire system with a pocket knife and string?" A few nearby technicians snickered, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. They were young, barely in their 20s, and followed Kyle's lead as a crowd began to form around the motionless jet. The smug techs and the silent old man. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again," Kyle snapped. "Step away from the aircraft, or I'll have you escorted off the base." Arthur ignored him. With deliberate care, he unrolled the leather pouch. Inside lay not crude tools, but a neatly arranged set of precision instruments. Old. Handcrafted, their metal dulled with age. One stood out, a uniquely angled spanner wrench, strange yet elegant. Kyle sneered. "Are you kidding me? Where'd you get that junk, a World War II surplus store? You probably worked on prop planes, huh, Pops? Things were easier back then." As his mockery lingered in the hot air, Arthur's fingers brushed the familiar wrench, and the world around him blurred. The bright tarmac faded into the dim, humid haze of a makeshift hangar decades ago. The scent of burnt fuel and sweat filled the air. A battle-damaged F-4 Phantom, riddled with shrapnel, bled hydraulic fluid onto the floor. A younger Arthur, grisd-mudged and focused, worked under the wing with that very same wrench. Outside, artillery thundered. A frantic crew chief shouted, "We need that bird in the air, Art. They're getting slaughtered out there." Arthur didn't answer. He tightened the wrench one final turn, the leak sealed, Sliding out, he nodded once. She'll fly. The memory vanished, leaving only stillness. Back on the tarmac, the tension had escalated. Another technician joked, maybe he thinks it needs a jump start. Nervous laughter followed. Watching from across the flight line was Master Sergeant Reyes, a grizzled veteran with 3 decades of experience. At first, he was irritated that a civilian had wandered in. But then he noticed the old man's stance, not confused or curious, but analytical. His eyes scanned the jet's structure with precision, landing on the same faulty panel Kyle's team had struggled with. Reyes felt a chill. He'd seen that kind of focus before, the kind of mastery that legends were made of. Kyle, losing patience, grabbed Arthur's arm roughly. That's it, old man. Field trip's over. We're heading to security. He started dragging him away. Reyes froze. A name flickered in his memory, a name from the old stories. He fumbled for his phone and called the maintenance commander's office. Sir, this is Master Sergeant Reyes. You're not going to believe this. We've got Viper 07 grounded, the one for the DV flight. The lead tech's about to have a civilian arrested. A civilian? How'd he get on the flight line? Came the confused reply. That's just it, sir, Reyes said quietly. The way he's looking at that jet. It reminds me of those stories, the ghost of the flight line. I think his name is Vance. Arthur Vance. Silence. Then say that again. Within minutes, the call reached Colonel Matthews, who was in a tense briefing about the same grounded jet. His aide burst into the room, breathless. Sir, it's about the civilian on the flight line. Matthews snatched the phone, his anger fading into disbelief. Vance, Arthur Vance, are you sure? When confirmation came, his face went pale. Get me his file, the one marked living legend. Now. Moments later, he was storming toward the runway with his command team, lights flashing and sirens wailing. Out on the tarmac, Kyle still gripped Arthur's arm, oblivious. Look, I get it, he said condescendingly. Things get confusing when you're older. For your own safety, I'm taking you to security. Maybe they can call your family. He tugged the old man's arm just as the rising wail of sirens tore through the air. Not base patrol, but command escort vehicles. A black staff car, flanked by 2 security trucks, raced toward them. The convoy screeched to a halt beside the F-16. The passenger door flew open, and out stepped Colonel Matthews, followed by his senior staff. The entire flight line fell silent. Kyle froze as the colonel marched straight toward him, eyes blazing, every step echoing authority. Matthews stopped 2 feet away, glancing down at Kyle's hand still clutching Arthur's arm. The look said everything. Kyle instantly released his grip. Then, without a word, Colonel Matthews turned to Arthur Vance and in one sharp, deliberate motion brought his hand to his brow, delivering the most precise and heartfelt salute of his career. The salute hung in the air, not just a formality, but a gesture so powerful and sincere that it seemed to hum in the silence around them. Mr. Vance, Colonel Matthews said, his voice carrying through the stunned stillness. It's an honor, sir. A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd. Mouths fell open. Every airman stood frozen. Kyle looked as if the world had tilted beneath his feet, pale, unsteady. Speechless, Matthews held his salute for a long moment before lowering his hand. When he finally spoke again, his tone was loud. Deliberate, meant for everyone present. For those too young or too unaware to understand whose presence they stand in, he began. This is Mr. Arthur Vance. He paused, letting the name sink in. In the early days of the Viper program, he was known as the ghost of the flight line. The man who appeared from nowhere to solve problems even the engineers thought were impossible. Mr. Vance was a lead design engineer for the original YF-16 prototype. He personally wrote 3 chapters of the maintenance manual you all use daily, including the section on the fly-by-wire system you've been struggling with. He holds 2 of the core patents on that system. Matthews stepped forward, his voice resonating with pride. During Operation Desert Storm, a critical software malfunction grounded an entire squadron. While the Pentagon was still debating, this man flew straight into a war zone with a small case of tools. Within 36 hours, 24 F-16s were back in the air. No medals, no ceremony. He just did the work and went home. The air grew heavy with awe. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. From the edge of the crowd, Master Sergeant Reyes nodded silently, a faint smile of recognition crossing his weathered face. He had known from the beginning. Asterisk this man, Matthews continued softly, turning back to Arthur, is not merely a veteran or an engineer. He is part of this aircraft's soul. He has forgotten more about the F-16 than most of us will ever learn. Then the colonel's tone changed. The warmth vanished, replaced by the biting chill of command. His gaze locked on Kyle. "Technician," he said coldly. "What is your name?" "Kyle, sir." "Airman First Class Kyle Peterson," he stammered. "Airman Peterson," Matthews repeated, his voice like steel. "Your arrogance and ignorance today have disgraced this wing. Faced with a problem you couldn't solve, you chose humiliation over humility. You mocked a man whose boots you're not worthy to polish. You saw a living legend and treated him as a nuisance, a mirror reflecting your own inadequacy. You have dishonored that uniform." The words hit like hammer blows. Kyle stood frozen, humiliated before everyone he led. Then softly, yet with command that silenced even Matthews, came a voice. "Colonel, that's enough." Arthur Vance spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried weight, the kind that demanded respect without asking for it. Matthews immediately fell silent. Arthur turned to Kyle. His expression was calm, almost kind. "Son," he said gently, "machines don't care about rank or pride. They only respond to the truth of the problem." He lifted a trembling hand and pointed not to the main avionics bay, but to a small, nearly hidden panel by the portside landing gear. "You were looking in the wrong place," he explained. "The issue isn't in the brain, it's in the nerves. That's the hydraulic bypass actuator for the emergency power unit. Common fault on the Block 30s, especially after cold altitude runs. The valve sticks." Unrolling his leather pouch, Arthur selected a small, worn spanner wrench, the same one from decades ago. He held it out to Kyle. "You don't need computers," he said softly. "Just a steady hand and a reminder to the machine of what it's meant to do." Kyle hesitated, then took the wrench. It felt heavy, weighted with history. For Arthur, time blurred. He was young again, standing in a clean room at General Dynamics. The chief designer of the F-16 handed him that very wrench, saying, "Sometimes, Art, the hardest problems don't need a complex answer, just courage and simplicity. Remember that." Back in the present, Kyle knelt beside the F-16. Every eye was on him. He found the actuator. It looked small, insignificant, but he trusted the old man's word. With a single precise motion, he tapped it. Tap, a faint hiss followed. A click, then life. The F-16's cockpit lit up, glowing green. Screens flickered alive. The calm, automated voice of bitching Betty filled the air. Main power online. A hum built from deep within the jet, the auxiliary power unit spinning up, strong and steady. The dead machine breathed again. A stunned silence swept across the crowd, followed by a rising wave of murmurs. 3 hours of failed diagnostics solved in 3 seconds. With a single touch from a Legends tool, Colonel Matthews stared at the glowing cockpit. Then at Arthur, his expression filled with reverence. Turning to the maintenance commander, he said firmly, "Airman Peterson and his team will report for a week-long seminar beginning 0800 tomorrow. The topic, the history and legacy of the F-16 airframe. First lesson taught by Mr. Vance, if he'd do us the honor." A formal base-wide apology would follow. The event would become required reading at the Air Force Maintenance Schoolhouse, a story etched into history. Weeks later, the dust had settled. Kyle Peterson was no longer the same man. His arrogance was gone, replaced by humility. One afternoon, he found Arthur Vance sitting quietly in the base library. Reading, Kyle approached with 2 cups of coffee, nerves tight. "Mr. Vance," he said softly, Arthur looked up, eyes still kind. I just wanted to thank you, Kyle continued, setting a coffee beside him, for the lesson, and to say I'm sorry. There's no excuse. Arthur studied the young man, then nodded, his voice gentle. Sit down, son. Kyle did. They didn't speak of the incident again. Instead, Arthur began sharing stories about the wind over a new wing design, the rhythm of an engine's heartbeat, and how the best machines weren't just built, but breathed life. Kyle listened, truly listened, realizing at last that the soul of a jet isn't in its circuits or software, but in the passion of the people who create it. The story of Arthur Vance reminds us that true legends often walk among us quiet, humble and unseen, waiting not for glory, but for a problem that only they can solve.